Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Old Testament Come Follow Me week. We're going to discuss Genesis 24 through 27. So Genesis 24 through 27. Let's have an opening prayer. Brother Combs will say our prayer for us, please.
Our kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for thy many blessings you've bestowed upon us. We're especially thankful for thy Son, Jesus Christ, and his great atoning sacrifice that makes it possible for us to have everlasting life. And as we start this Come Follow Me class, thy Spirit will be with us. And the things that we do, say, and study will be meaningful to us. And then we can take them into our heart and help us.
And we'll make the announcement here. We're not going to do this on Wednesdays here at the Stake Center anymore. Today is our last day. We're finishing up in February. We're going to move to Mondays. Again, I have several wonderful seminary teachers that watch this, and they're like, boy, if I could get this earlier in the week, it would help me out. So we're going to move it to Mondays. In Georgetown, several weeks I have conflicts. Weeks will be just recorded because I have some conflicts. But I'll try to get this out on the stories together that you'll be reading all about this week. Abraham's servant chooses Rebekah as a wife for Isaac. Love that story. We'll talk about it first. It's such a fun story. Abraham marries again, and they have children. Abraham dies. Rebekah gives birth to Jacob and Esau, all of that story. And then the whole selling the pottage for the birthright and so forth. We'll cover that briefly. Isaac is the promised blessings. Esau marries multiple times. And Jacob receives blessings. And then the whole confrontation between Jacob and Esau. So there's lots of stories. One thing that I like in the Come Follow Me reading this week, if you get in her mind, yeah, there's great doctrine, but it's not relevant to me. We need to help people feel and see the relevancy in their doctrines and our principles. But even before that sentence, I wish they would have put one more sentence, was we have to identify doctrines and principles. So here's the stories this week. If we read the stories, and that's a great primary version, do you know and understand the stories? And again, here in this class, I give you some insight a little more fully, a little more deeply. But we have to take those stories and say, a simple question could be, what lesson does the Lord want us to learn from this? Once we say, okay, here's the lesson, then it's easy to identify a doctrine or a principle. What is a doctrine or a principle? So here's a few from this week. If those are the list of stories you can see on your screen, here's a list of some doctrines or principles. Marriage is essential to God's eternal plan. That is a beautiful doctrine that we can pull from multiple stories in this week's reading. Marriage after losing a spouse. That is a great principle that we can talk about. Agency and choosing principles. Family, the Abrahamic covenant. All doctrines and principles for this week. Grief when children choose contrary to how they were raised. Brought up in this week's reading. Jesus Christ is the well of living water. Sibling rivalries, conflict can be resolved. Those can all be brought up. So here in the room, is there a lesson we can learn from this week's reading that you want to add to this list? I'd love to hear. Listen to your wife. No, I didn't find that in here. That was you. No, just kidding. That a great one. The conversation with spouses.
If you haven't listened to Follow Him, you need to, because power for the women to better understand our role.
Oh, absolutely.
I absolutely. By the time I was done yesterday, I thought, why have I diminished myself all these years?
Oh no! And notice it is Rebekah who takes the lead in this.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. No, that's a great principle. And when you're teaching a class, especially if you're teaching an adult class, you can start out the class, okay, here's the stories. What lessons did you learn? My kids will tease me all the time. I'll say, okay, kids, come here for a second. And they'll even say, oh, here we go. Dad has another life lesson from this event or this situation. And I'll laugh. I'm like, yep, come here. But it's great when they can discover them too. So let's go to Genesis 24. Specifically, again, open up Genesis 24. I put a list of some of the stories back up on the screen, some of the principles and doctrines. And I'll help you with some of the questions that we can go through, and we'll have a little fun with that. But for right now, let's start with Genesis 24. Oh, how about... I'm going to do... I'll put some of these up here. Let me make this bigger so I can see it. Go to verse 3. Here's a question that I think you could ask teenagers. I think you could ask young adults. We can ask us. Why was marrying a Canaanite? And they're specifically talking about outside of the covenant. Why was that so? And the word used, where's the word in there? Well, it comes later when Esau marries out of the covenant. Grief is used. Shouldn't we celebrate weddings? Can we just briefly in this room here answer, why is marrying in the covenant important to you? Anyone want to share? Go ahead.
Well, to me, I think it just makes life a lot easier for one, and being able to have the same belief system.
Thing is, we're not the only faith tradition, religion that teaches marry. The Jews have a very strong culture of date and marry, so they can keep that Jewish culture. It's very strong.
Well, Catholic,
Yeah,
Catholics too.
and so
My friend who's a widow has chosen to have a relationship with an older man who's a widower rather than marry him because he was divorced and it wasn't the church. And so I found that sort of interesting that they needed the relationship, but because the church wouldn't recognize their marriage,
they brought up some really good points. Just teenagers coming up with some really good ideas of why.
Do you also think that there's just a sense of peace or comfort? I mean, my husband died when I was 45, so I was pretty young, but I got married at 18, and I got married in the temple. And so there's always been sort of a sense of peace and comfort that we have that connection.
Oh, sure.
Even though realistically, I don't know. I mean, I hope to think we would still be married today and all of this 50-some years later, but I don't know. But there's a peace and comfort in moments of grief, and I would imagine even divorce, I don't know, but having worked with a lot of single adults, I think even having been divorced, if you understand the importance of the covenants you made, even if your partner turns his back or her back on those covenants, you still made those covenants, and it's still peace.
And there's a recent video, at least I've seen it recently. It was a church made it about a couple where he loses his faith. And they sit down as a couple and they talk about it. How do you have a healthy relationship when one no longer religious that marry, statistically speaking, have healthier and more long-term marriages than people who are both religious but they're of different religion. They've done lots of research on that because of that whole dynamic of working together versus working against. Please.
Well, just thought, maybe Drew may not, but he commanded not to marry a Canaanite. And of course, if they did marry a Canaanite, they would get married, have children and stuff. And the mother would have, in my opinion, more influence on the children or whatever, and may, depending on how religious you want to call it, in her faith or the Canaanites, that would have an undue influence on the children.
Yeah, then the whole question of who gets who gets baptized, what faith. There's a lot of dynamics there. That's it.
In my family, kind of mediate different religions, like Baptist, Catholic, and it didn't work out because I don't know. Underlying there may be a lot of other conflict. But,
there's definitely some challenges in there. I'm going to go to let's go down to verse 16 for a moment.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
History-wise?
Actually, we're going to go to 7, but yeah, please.
So when I was reading, I didn't understand that part, that the Canaanite meant that they were
Outside of the covenant.
So what is it about, who are the Canaanites, and why did he have to go to Egypt then? Are people in Egypt in the covenant?
No, he went to
Or no, he didn't go to
Mesopotamia, somewhere where there was family where they knew that they were members of the church. You know, I'd have to look up. I know I've read it and seen it before.
I thought he said his old country,
Yeah,
and he's talking about.
that's right. Basically, he's going back to where they know that there's.
Or close to Kuwait. And,
Yeah.
Okay.
So just the Canaanites were not members of the covenant
Okay.
line. Again, it's not so much marrying in the right family, it's marrying in the covenant.
Yeah.
Because we'll see Esau chooses to get married to someone of the right family, but that's not the point. It's the temple marriage, so to speak. For example, you can marry a convert in the temple and have a wonderful family relationship, right? Versus you can marry someone who was Brigham Young's great-great-grandson, but if he's not a worthy priesthood holder, still can't get married in the covenant. So the covenant's more important than the family lines, which we see in here. Verse 7 for a moment here. Remember, Abraham sending his servant to go find a wife for his son. But I really like this. Took me from my father's house, from the land of my kindred. But then, I put a cross-reference here to Doctrine and Covenants 84:88. 84:88. And I'll read that. Whosoever receiveth you, again, here he's talking about missionary work. Again, there's an assignment, you're going to go forth and preach. In the servant's case, you're going to go forth and get a wife for my son. Both are assignments from the Lord. Verse 88, and whoso receiveth you, there I will be also. For I will go before your face, and I will be on your right hand and on your left, and my spirit shall be in your hearts, and mine angels round about you to bear you up. I think that's true for you and I today. And if I were in a class, maybe I would ask the question, when have you felt God preparing the way for you in an assignment he's given you? And you could have a couple people share some wonderful testimonies, and then you could ask, what assignment has the Lord given you that you're a little nervous about? Can you feel that there might be angels going before? Fun little verse in there, verse 7. I really like that. So let's just do a little bit about the story. Verse 11. The servant made his camels to kneel down. Again, we're in Genesis 24, verse 11. He made his camels to kneel down without the city by a well of water. Why did he go to the well? He tells us at the time of the evening, even the time that women go out to draw water. So if you want to meet ladies, you need to go where the ladies are. Now, I will say this, the well in many cases represents the Savior, right? He's the well of living water. You've got to go to the well to meet righteous people, not to the bar. Years ago, when I was serving as bishop, I met with a very, very wonderful lady, and she's in tears saying, every guy I ever meet is no good. And she used some wonderful adjectives to describe the men that she's been dating. And after talking with her for a little while, I'm like, well, where are you meeting these guys? Well, she's been hanging out in places that righteous priesthood holders wouldn't hang out, bars and so forth. So a great conversation for young adults, or even single people of all ages. Are you going to the well? You got to go where they're at. And where might that be? And you could have them list them. For young single adults, colleges, the righteous places, right? Whether it's a church school or an institute program. Here in Lexington, I think we had 64 people last Thursday night. That's a great group of people to hang out with each other and meet righteous people. That's a well, right? I've seen young single adult conferences. There's one coming up here in a month or two. All the young single adults should go to that. Faith-promoting environment where they have a lot of fun. Young single adult dances. Yeah, please.
In my studies, I was listening to something, and it had mentioned that they sent to find Rebecca was like the most trusted, oldest, wisest of the servants, and they kind of paralleled him with Jesus and how we should go to Christ to help us with the things that we're looking for.
Equally yoked.
Yes.
Love it. Love it. So have some fun conversations. I have young teenage kids as well as my adult teenage kids. And we were talking about this just a little bit. We talked about dating. This is a great time to pull out the For Strength of Youth pamphlet and talk about dating. My son wants to go to this church prom that's coming up, and we talked with him about who he's going to take. And because he wants to take a young lady that's not of our faith, and we're like, that's okay. Let's talk about it. And we had some great conversations. You can make it relevant. Remember the term we used at the beginning? Relevant, whoever you're talking to. Primary children would have a different conversation about this than a group full of widows and widowers. But they can still have a conversation. And 88-year-olds in there. We love both of them. They're just in different.
Your seminary class or anything, but I do think it's important in adult classes that you acknowledge people have made hard choices in their lives.
Oh, absolutely.
sometimes
And usually, the more difficult the conversation, more sensitive, the more important it is.
Yeah.
So you have to put that, okay, we need to have this conversation because it's a conversation. But we can do it in a faith-promoting, uplifting way that can be relevant to everyone's circumstance. And everyone has to apply it to their own relevance. For example, if I can share something on a little personal note, this past Sunday, I was in another ward and I was invited to teach the Sunday school class. And the part where Abraham and Sarah had a baby later in life, we were just talking about sometimes the Lord delays his blessings. And a wonderful, faithful man shared his experience that he and his wife were years before they were able to have children. And he shared that the Lord was able to. At the same time, there was another wonderful, faithful woman who says, I'll never have children in this life. My blessings will come even later. Now, they could be, I didn't mean to be offensive to somebody else. No, you just have different circumstances. And I think the value is when both share their circumstance, because it lets everybody feel the power of blessings. Because some blessings won't be fulfilled in this life. Some are delayed. Some immediate. And we will never in this life completely understand why we get one versus the other, and somebody else might have another one. Great conversation, great topic. I love this. Let's keep going and doing some things here. Notice verse 11 again. Why did he go to the well? Because that's where the women were. Verse 12, he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, I pray thee. I think it's a point to make here. Pray for assistance in anything. I mean, in this case, it's about dating, courtship, and marriage. And he's praying about it. I think that's a wonderful topic. Pray for your children, your grandchildren. Pray for yourselves on any topic. I just love the insight. Let's keep going down to verse 13. He has a plan, right? I stand here by the well of water when the daughters of men of the city will come out. And then he says, okay, here's my plan in 14. Let it come to pass that the damsel to whom I shall say, let down thy pitcher, I pray thee, and drink. In other words, let her be the one. So what happens? Verse 15. And it came to pass before he had done speaking. Again, there we have an instant blessing. He's still praying, and the answer to his prayer is right there. Now, in my experience, in my life, that happens sometimes. But more often than not, there's a delayed blessing, right? But it does happen. So maybe we can recognize when it does happen. While he's speaking, Rebecca came out. And notice what he does. Well, let's talk about Rebecca just for a moment here. And the damsel, this is 16, and the damsel was very fair to look upon. There is, in the Joseph Smith translation, it's clear that she was the most beautiful that this man had ever seen, and was instantly, wow, notice his response to verse 17. This is my advice to men who are young single adults. When you find a woman that is beautiful and, notice what he does. He run. Don't walk. Don't hesitate. Let's just play it cool. No, I love that. Run to meet her. No, and have a little bit of fun with that. And he asked her for water. And in verse 19, we learn a little bit about her. She draws the water for the camels. And again, how many camels were there? Do you remember?
10.
10 camels. And I have seen it where people have done mathematical equations. How much water can a camel drink? Times that by 10. How many times would a typical bucket of water have to be drawn? This is a long time effort. This is not a convenient, oh yeah, no big deal, let me get you a quick drink here. This is effort.
But you know what? He ran, but she ran too.
Oh, absolutely.
It said she hastened, so it would suggest to me the Lord was also with her in the same way he was walking ahead of the servant.
Love it. And what we don't know, which I think is fun, is maybe she's been praying for this. I would like to be married someday. Will this ever happen? We don't know all those background
All
stories,
these
right?
producers are inviting me out, and I can't. No, I'm just kidding.
Love it. So here is where, with teenagers especially, it's a lot of fun. You can say, hey, what attributes does she have that are just amazing? Well, she's hardworking, she's beautiful, she's obviously righteous, she comes from a good family. I mean, you can list all these things up here. And I've started classes with this before where I'll have them, okay, what do you think the ideal spouse looks like? And I'll have them make a list, and it's a lot of fun. It's nothing but fun. And then I play a video clip that Elder Bednar made years ago. That's really funny. I don't think it was meant to be funny, but I find a lot of humor in it. He says, I've seen a lot of people make lists about what they want in future spouses. And then he says, and I'll quote, he says, how arrogant are we to assume that we are something so special, now I'm paraphrasing, that someone like that would want to be married to us. And then Elder Uchtdorf made a similar comment. He's like, what makes you think that a perfect woman would want to marry you? Talking to young single men. And by the way, right now the church does 3 broadcasts for young single adults every year, January, May, and September, and they're great. I think they're some of the best talks. They're not limited by a time frame, and they're talking to an audience that I love and spend a lot of time with, so they're great. So here's what I would do in a class. Instead of saying, what attributes do you want in a spouse? You could do that, but then add the word, what Christ-like attributes. And then add, what Christ-like attributes do I currently have that would attract somebody? I think we need to mention that we have good attributes. And then, is there a Christ-like attribute that I should develop or work on? Especially for young single adults, that's a great conversation to have. Maybe even teenagers, younger teenagers. You know what? Before you get married, what Christ-like attribute do you feel that the Lord would have you possess before you enter an eternal marriage? Just some great topics. They're a lot of fun to do. Oh, and then there's the gift exchange and a lot of fun stuff. Let's go down to verse. There's a lot, but we're just going to do a few things here. Let's go to verse 58. I find verse 58 again. Rebecca here is being asked to leave with a guy she just barely met, to marry a man she's never met, in a land she's never lived. And her response in 3 words, I will go. Again, cross-reference there. 1 Nephi 3:7, I will go, I will do the things which...
Don't forget that, how cool is it that her mother and her brother, suggesting maybe her dad was dead, I don't know, but they called her out to make the decision, because we always think of...
It's your choice.
This culture, like, okay, here you go, you've got to... But they said, well, let's ask her from her mouth what she wants, and she says, I will go.
I love that. In fact, the exact phrase in verse 58, wilt thou go with this man?
Yeah.
I will go. Recognizing righteous women. Maybe if I were teaching Relief Society, I would ask, who are some righteous women that you know? Now, I'm going to say something here that can be really sensitive. Please don't be offended. Sometimes women don't like Mother's Day because all they hear about righteous women. And they're like, well, I'm not that righteous woman. And there's a comparison sense. And it causes a lot of women to really, I've talked with a lot of women who hate Mother's Day because they don't want to go to church because all they do is talk about all these women, and I'm not that. Guys are different. I've never met a guy that says, I hate Father's Day because they talk about all these righteous fathers and I'm not measuring up to them. Again, that's just a characteristic trait, right? So may I invite, and I know I'm not in a position to invite, but may I invite maybe it's okay to look at another righteous woman and see some righteous attributes that she has, as I should with righteous men, right? And role models. And are there Christ-like attributes that I can emulate? And can I do that without being comparison and without judgmental and do it in a righteous way? I think there's a way to do that.
It's the mom guilt gene that we all
Yeah, men don't get that gene very strong in them. But maybe we should have it a little bit more. Let's go to 67. We'll just end with this chapter with verse 67. I love the 3 words. Because remember, again, I'm a guy, so from Isaac's point of view here, you're back home waiting for the servant. You have no idea what's about to walk over the hill. But he sees her, she's beautiful, and they marry, and the 3 words, and he loved her. And he loved her.
Is that highlighted?
Yes.
That's so
In
cute.
pink. Make sure it's in pink.
I did.
It's in pink.
Excellent.
And
Mine's in yellow. I'm changing it right now.
isn't it beautiful that he felt comforted because
Mhm.
I connect those two.
Yeah.
His mother's death, and so here she came into his life and comforted him.
Your wife should not replace your mother. They should have very, very different roles.
She can still
But there is a level of comfort there.
Yes, there is.
Well, some people do marry their mother. They want to marry someone to replace their mother.
Or their father.
That's another. Oh yes, and women sometimes marry their father to. But let's not. We'll skip that topic for today. Even what I want to do is just mention for a moment here, maybe some of our righteous church leaders. In our first presidency, all 3 members of the first presidency are married. 2 of them have lost previous wives to death, and they remarried. Younger women. I asked my kids, we talked about this morning actually, and do you have a problem with that? And they're like, no, I don't think so. And then I bring up, well, if mom died and I married a younger woman and had kids, would that cause problems? And all of them, that's weird, Dad. No. I'm like, wait a second. And so we had a conversation. Why is it okay in one sense? Like, well, Dad, they're older and we're still living at home. I go, so if someone loses a spouse and they still have kids at home, they shouldn't remarry? And then one of my daughters says, well, no, if a woman's at home and she has kids, she might need some company and someone to help take care of her. She should marry. So it's okay for the woman. And I said, now let's think about this for a moment. If a woman's going to get married, there's also a man that's going to get married. And then the whole conversation starts going, and it's a lot of fun. But I would like to hear your thoughts. I know there's a lot of opinion in here, so let's take it principle-based. Can we do a principle-based in here rather than opinion-based? If someone's a widow or a widower, or what principles would you suggest be helping them and guiding on whether they should date and remarry later on? Is that a fair question? Do you want to give some principles? No?
I'm surprised that people have a hard time with it. And it just seems like a logical thing if someone wants to do it. And it seems just as logical if someone doesn't want to do it.
Who normally has the difficult time with it?
The children.
It's the children. And you're saying you think it's the daughters or the sons or both?
No, I was thinking if a woman loses a spouse, I feel like they don't always feel like they need to remarry, but men usually do better with the
Within
companionship.
a year.
I don't know.
That would be it. There's our expert.
It was my oldest daughter that suggested that I should remarry, but my youngest one couldn't handle it.
Yeah, interesting, huh?
If I sent some pictures, I was down in Mexico, I sent some pictures, and Rosie was in the picture, but 10 feet away from me, and she couldn't look at the picture.
She had a hard time with that.
She had her time.
It's interesting. Now, I'm going to tell a story that I hope is accurate. I'm never intentionally telling a story that's not. I've heard that when President Nelson's wife died, he actually waited until his children all came to him and said, Dad, it's okay if you get remarried. And apparently one of his daughters was a little more reluctant than the other. So he waited because of the daughters and the dynamic. And there's some that don't. They're like, they'll get married immediately after, and sometimes the kids struggle with that. So maybe a principle would be, if I'm a parent and I'm going to remarry, probably have a conversation with my kids, explain why, and let them feel maybe some of the things that I'm feeling. Is that a good principle that maybe can help guide us? Please.
I've seen where they don't consult their children, and it never worked for the children.
Yeah.
They never, ever felt close to the second.
Thank you. See, that's great advice. Great counsel. Anyone else?
Well, those qualities that you were talking about before, they need to be a part of that decision, those Christ-like qualities, which will help you, first of all, discern if this is something you should be doing, and if this is the person that would be a good one for your family or your children or whatever. So many things depend on, like my husband was sick for 15 years, so by the time he died, the kids were, they were prepared, but they were already married at that time.
So death might have an impact.
Yeah.
And timing.
I worked in hospice for 10 years, and let me tell you, you talk about conflict, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sure. Those are great things to be aware of and look for. Is there an age limit? I'll tell you another story that I'm pretty sure is true. I think it was President Hinckley that told the story. President Hunter, Howard W. Hunter, was old. He was the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and they were in the temple in one of their regular meetings, which are typically on a Thursday up in the upper room. And business was as normal and usual as ever. He conducted all the business, and then at the very end of the meeting, which he's conducting, he stopped and he goes, well, okay, let's conclude our meeting. And by the way, I just want you to know I'm going to go down the hall and I'm going to get married. And apparently, no one in the quorum knew anything about this. They're like, what? Just him and a dear friend have been friends for a very, very, very long time, decided we're going to be married, and rather than both be widower, and please, what are you thinking?
I'm sorry. So George Durant, I don't know if y'all remember him, but he's so awesome. After his wife died, he decided he needed to be married again, and Susan Easton Black, who you've probably heard of too because she's written lots of books, they were very good friends, and he decided that they should get married, so he went and asked her, and they did marry. And they were on the Sunday school board or something where they helped write all these lessons for Come Follow Me. That was a mission that they served together, and they've served in Nauvoo and all these things. And who knows? I mean, they were in their 70s and chose to marry each other for a lot of righteous reasons.
Sure.
And he just knew he didn't need to be alone.
Sometimes it's just the companionship. Sometimes they can go serve together, because, Brian, there's certain missions men can't serve without a wife, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is that... Remember you talking to me about this?
It's true.
There isn't any.
None?
No.
That's not true then.
Men can take care of themselves. No, I'm just kidding.
Generally, but at the family history library, you don't need a companion,
Yeah.
and that's the reason I went.
That's where you served. Loved it.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for your comments. This is a lot of fun. Like I said, these topics that we're doing right now can be the most sensitive of them all.
Since you brought that up, I get to say something. If you get old and like us and you become alone, don't marry somebody to be able to go on a mission together, because there are divorces that occur on missions.
Yeah, there's more depth
So
that
be
has to be
careful.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate
There are? I didn't even think about
Well,
that.
they might go home early. Not that we had a couple
Finally
like
can't
that, but
stand
we
these
did.
24/7.
I mean, really, 24/7, you don't even know each other, and your kids don't like each other, so, from afar.
That's a
It's
great
very challenging. just so
great
you
point
know.
as well.
You gotta marry for the right reasons.
Yes, you
Sure.
do.
Oh, excellent points all the way around. Any other thoughts? Love it. And maybe if you have parents that are widows or widowers, or our in-laws or so forth. Be sensitive to their needs and wants and desires. And remember, they have a life and they need companionship and they might have different things. And it's a conversation to have. Maybe this week, while they're reading that, you can talk with them. Just say, I just want you to know, whatever you decide to do, I support. And that could go a long ways. A little bit of love and support. Let's continue on. This has been fun. Let's move on. Stepmoms and stepdads, maybe you want to talk about that with your primary kids. How do you have a happy family when sometimes you have to go spend weekends with another family, right? You could have a good conversation in here. What Christ-like attributes would help a blended family? Again, conversations that could be worth having here. Verse 8. No, we got to do 5 first. Here's another sensitive topic that everyone can be mad at me on this one for, but that's okay. Verse 5. Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but there's a lot of other kids involved. How do you divide up an inheritance? You could really start future family feuds with this, right? But notice, Abraham made the decision before he died. So there's that's not what Dad wanted. It was very clear to the family. I think there's a true principle in there. But notice verse 6, but unto the sons of Isaac's the covenant son. That does not mean he's better than everyone else. I want to make that clear. Covenant keepers are not better. It just means they have a responsibility. Remember, birthright means 2 things. You're born into the right, and you have to be righteous. You take one or the other out of that equation, there's no birthright. In this case, Isaac is the birthright. He's going to receive all that Abraham has. But then with that comes a lot of responsibilities. Today's culture might be very different for you. And most cultures, they just divide it up equally. But I think you could have I could argue a point here. If you had a son or a daughter who's a heavy drug addict, an alcoholic, you know that giving them an inheritance could actually destroy them and ruin them. You might, I'm not going to give them a financial gift. I might give them something else. So with that, I think if you would agree with that, you could argue that kids don't need an equal amount. I've told my mom, I don't need anything that you have. No, she's probably listening right now, and she's saying, you're going to get 20% or whatever because there's 5 kids. I'm like, love you, Mom. I do. I love you, Mom. But really, there's a point when, is there something that one child should have? I remember my grandpa and grandma. They had one daughter, my aunt, and they had 4 sons. My dad's one of them. And grandma wanted her daughter to have the piano. And maybe that's a wonderful idea. If there's a special thing that you want. When my wife's grandmother passed away beforehand, she actually went around the house and put little stickers on stuff. I want this kid to have this, and this kid, or this granddaughter, and this grandson. And then, her wishes and so forth. There's not a right or a wrong way. I just think there's a prayerful, careful way. And I think there's some choices in here. Yeah, Brian.
The birthright son, which would be Isaac, in those days had the right. They had to take responsibility of their mother and all their sisters. So they were always given, the birthright was always given a bigger portion, a double portion from the rest. And we don't know how much Isaac got. Maybe he got just enough to be able to take care of this young wife who was a stepmother and all the daughters.
And today's culture is very different, right? Now, I'm not saying that our culture is better, because in many cases, if a woman's husband dies, she's alone. Nobody's taking care of her financially. In their culture, they would marry their brother's wife and physically and financially support her. I mean, their welfare system, in many ways, I know you can argue, but it's a superior system because there's no women left abandoned. Whereas today's culture, there's a lot.
What if they want to be left?
Yeah, that's a whole other argument. I'm not gonna. Wonderful conversation you could have with verse 8. Let's go down to verse 16. I just want to make the note here in verse 16 that, I really like, God did not abandon Ishmael. Again, Isaac is not better because he's the birthright. He just has a responsibility to share the gospel and to keep the covenant going. Members of the church today who make sacred covenants, they're not better than friends of other faiths or people who don't have faith. Wonderful, righteous woman who goes to the Lord to receive answers for the family. And I really, we don't have much time. I don't want to spend all day doing this. We've been here talking for a long. I don't want to spend all day on the whole blessing, switching, swapping thing. I think there's more to the story. We just don't understand the whole story. 2, I do like the verse actually, where it says, let me share it with you. Give me a second here. That verse 28, again, this is Genesis 25, verse 28. Isaac loved Esau. Why? Well, there's a reason. He provided venison and food. He had a relationship. He had a bonding relationship with his son. Rebekah loved Jacob. Is it okay to have favorites? You don't have to answer that out loud. But you might have a connection with one kid where your spouse might have a connection with another kid. And that's actually okay. I see that here, as long as it doesn't cause divisions and both feel loved. And are you going to go on a mission? I don't know. Probably not. I don't want to. It was just for no other reason than, it's not important to me. I haven't felt that in my heart that my priesthood responsibilities are important to me. Kind of see that in Esau, and we'll see how it affects him later on. Let's go over to chapter 26 now. Abraham gets his own famine. Isaac gets a famine. Well, great. We'll get to Jacob and his famine. And then Joseph goes to Egypt. Why? And the brothers go because of a famine. This is a time of famine. And so I mention that because it's recorded as the history of the world. Times of famine. Let's go to verse... I guess the rest few verses are all about blessings. Verse 18, I just want to mention something here that I think is worth noting a little bit about Isaac's character. Isaac was a peaceful man. Remember, he shows up to the wells that he has dug, and people have filled him in with dirt, or other people have taken him over. And rather than fight for what's rightfully his in this case, Isaac digged again the wells of water. He's going to go dig other wells. I just think and there's a whole conversation in there. Verse 21, they digged another well. I just think we learn a little bit about Isaac's nature. And because of it, in verse 28, he makes a covenant with his neighbors. They understand this guy's a peaceful guy, and he builds good neighborly relationships. And then 27, our last chapter here, chapter 27. Again, here's the blessing. I think there's a specific verse that I wanted to read here. Earlier this week, I taught a seminary class with some high school seniors, and it was wonderful. We invited our stake patriarch to come, who was fabulous. And one of the questions that was posed and answered deals with this very topic. What if you don't feel like you got the right blessing? I mean, really, is there really trickery going on here? I don't know the whole story. But is the blessing, could Isaac have said, Dad, I got the wrong blessing? And Abraham, well, or Isaac and Jacob, could Jacob get the wrong blessing and Esau got the wrong blessing? God knows who he's blessing. Can you trick God into getting somebody else's blessing? I hope you all feel the answer to that is no. Isaac got the correct blessing to Jacob and Esau, regardless of what went on here and what goes on here. And our patriarch gave some wonderful insights that, because he's been only a patriarch for a little while, and one of the girls asked, how do you know what to say in a blessing? I mean, how does that feel to give a blessing? And the answer is, some of these people he doesn't know at all. But he goes, in every case, I'm not the one, this is his words, which I thought was great, I'm not the one giving the blessing. This is the Lord's blessing. I'm just the instrument in helping them get that blessing. So maybe here we can all take a moment to reflect, look at our patriarchal blessings, and realize this is not a blessing from the patriarch. It's a blessing from the Lord. And what can we do to help those blessings be fulfilled? And he does that. And before we do our marvelous day, and we hope you enjoy.